Welcome to Clinician's Corner. Here, Molly and I will provide you with evidence-based insights and practical tools for addressing ultra-processed food addiction. This segment is designed for both individuals navigating recovery and professionals supporting clients through the treatment process. We will be bridging personal experience with clinical expertise to enhance understanding about the treatment of food addiction and the many pathways to recovery.
Each episode explores key topics such as the neurobiology of addiction, strategies for sustainable recovery, behavioral interventions, and the impact of diet trauma. We'll also discuss practical approaches for fostering self-compassion, managing setbacks, and building individualized, empowering eating practices.
Whether you are in recovery or a clinician working with clients, Clinician's Corner offers research-informed perspectives, real-world applications, and therapeutic tools to support long-term healing.
Join us the first Friday of each month for thoughtful conversations that equip you with the knowledge and strategies needed for meaningful progress in ultra-processed food addiction recovery.
Expert insights,
practical tools,
transforming recovery one conversation at a time. Happy New Year, Molly!
Happy New Year, Clarissa! I'm wearing stars.
I love it. Year. Beautiful. I'm just wearing my white shirt. So it's but I'm wearing the shirt that I feel like embodies my word for 2025.
Okay. So tell me about your word for 2025, because I know we kind of teased that we were going to talk about it. So I'm sure people are waiting to hear.
So I decided my word for 2025 is flourishing. And I'll tell you why I picked that word. I think because it symbolizes like my desire to grow and to thrive and like live in alignment with the potential I believe I have. And it goes from like the past of always a bit feeling like survival to thrival. And also, I really feel like it aligns with my holistic vision in terms of different aspects of my life, right? It's not just one area. I want like my health and my relationships and my career and creativity and spirituality. And then finally, I think it also speaks to like new beginnings. And as 2025 is starting, I have a new puppy and his name is Benson. And actually his full name is Mr. Benson Florin, which means flourishing, Kennedy. So that is my word for 2025. And I'm dying to know yours.
Yeah, well, funny enough, I feel like my shirt also kind of embodies a bit of the word that I picked for this year. I went a little spiritual maybe. So my word is emanation or emanate. And the reason why I picked it is because it aligns with some of the more spiritual work that I've been doing, my private spiritual work I've been working on. And it really kind of ties in like these ideas of like empowerment and action and transformation and growth. And a word that I've always been kind of like attracted to is the word alchemy. Alchemy just means like when you take things and you put them together and you come up with something new. And I feel like that has always been probably a strength of mine, or maybe not always, but certainly it's a strength that I've come to have over the years. And so emanation has this the ingredients are a bit of alchemy and magnetism. And so I really want to think about like giving out. So emanating out into the world, like my authenticity, my love, like those kinds of things. But then it also like has that opposite, like that magnetism. So like hoping then that I attract it back. So I'm really focusing this year on really, really thinking about the internal work that I'm doing, emanating it out into the world, and just looking for the signs that it is coming back to me, because I am a person who really forgets to look for the signs that the universe is actually working in my favor. I know you and I have talked a lot about the opposite of paranoia is pronoia, and you really lean into pronoia.
I believe everything's going to be amazing all the time.
I know. And so this word I feel like is like something that's going to let me kind of ease into that belief of pronoia. So that's my word so emanate or emanating or emanation is my word for 2025.
Oh, I love it. I'm so excited to like see how it plays out and see like how we maybe do a recap at the end of the year and we can say like, how did this word show up for you in 2025?
Yeah, I'm totally looking forward to it. I'm so excited for it. So yeah, so let's talk about what do we need to talk about? What does our first Clinician's Corner of 2025, what do we need to cover?
So I think it's going to be really important. I was noticing in our sweet sobriety group, a lot of people were asking, like, what is the difference between a slip and a return to use? So I thought, with the holiday season, that's a really tough time for people. And it may be helpful for them to identify, was that a slip? Was that a return to use? If I'm somebody that counts days, do I need to start over? If I'm is it helpful to count days? Like whatever that is for you. But just to really get clarity on how the addiction world looks at this in terms of, some people would say a relapse is a return to use, and we say, I prefer, look at your face already. I'm so excited to say. So, but we prefer return to use over using that other R relapse word. I do anyways, anytime, or reoccurrence.
Yeah, I would say, I agree with that because there is actually a technical definition for relapse. And when people aren't actually meeting criteria for relapse, I think that using that word can be more harmful than good, that we need to really use correct language because language does matter when we're talking about treating addiction, recovery in addiction, all of those things. And so relapse really means a return to symptoms. So using that substance or doing that behavior again is not actually a return to symptoms because doing those things is not a symptom.
Right.
Right. When we look at the criteria of substance use disorder, the use of that thing does not actually show up on that list.
Show up in that. Yeah, you're right. It's just the symptoms of the disorder we're talking about is the relapse. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Which is why I really do like recurrence or return to use because those terms actually get closer to what's actually happening. And recurrence, I actually just love that much more, right? Because again, thinking about language matters. When we talk about return to use, that's been a word that I've used for or a term that I've used for a long time until I heard you talk about recurrence one day. And I'm like, yeah, that one actually just makes more sense. I think return to use is just a little still too reminiscent of talking
back
about like
day
substance
one,
abuse.
Harsh.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
where it's like
not
that
common.
shaming kind of language, or like it can have those undertones where I really like recurrence, that old behavior recurred. But, this is like we were talking about slips. Like this could also be like a slip or a lapse. Like you can kind of interchange those words as well, because it just means that, again, maybe we ate the thing, maybe we were accidentally dosed, maybe we, found ourselves in a really stressful situation and all of a sudden we wake up and we're doing that old behavior because that rutted neural pathway, just like we were in survival mode and we went back to it. And I don't think that there should be like shame and blame around that. I think there needs to be a word that says, oh, that recurred, so that we can go, oh, what made that happen? How do I get out of it?
Mm-hmm. No, I think so. If I'm thinking about even in terms of definition, right? I think it really refers to different levels of deviation, maybe from our recovery plan. And that can be helpful just to kind of reduce, the guilt and shame and maybe encourage learning and resilience more. So I like to think of slip as kind of a brief lapse where you temporarily engage in the behavior that you're trying to avoid. So maybe I'm eating a food outside my recovery plan that's probably ultra processed or sugary. So I'm going to think about it as something that's going to be really short-lived. It doesn't mean I've abandoned the recovery process. And often I'm going to be able to get right back on my plan right away. And it's really going to be seen as this learning opportunity where I'm going to be like, oh, okay, so I was in that situation at this maybe holiday holiday party and, everyone was eating and maybe I felt pressure. Maybe I just didn't even really realize and I ate something. Maybe it was, it had hidden sugar in it. But once I realized it, I stopped and I just, started eating my whole foods again. So that is really something that can help me grow in recovery rather than like beating myself up. I can be like, okay, well, what did I learn here? This is what I can do differently next time. Now I'm going to be more mindful that maybe this is a situation where I need to have a different level of hypervigilance around my recovery. So this might be a situation where I might be at a high risk for, vulnerability to, have a reoccurrence. And so I would define that kind of as a slip. And then a reoccurrence is a really maybe a more sustained departure from our recovery plan, which I think the main difference for me is like there's this loss of control. So now I'm reverting back to old eating habits. It's an extended period of time. I'm going to be going through the psychological, emotional, physical consequences that are associated with it. It's going to last longer than a slip. And maybe I need additional support to overcome it. And it's going to start to probably be associated with those feelings of like hopelessness, right? Shame, guilt. It's going to make it hard to like get quote unquote back on track. And so this is where I really think you need to start looking at, okay, what were my strategies? Were they helpful or maybe they didn't work this time? Maybe I need more support. Maybe now I have a deeper understanding of some of these underlying issues that may be at play. And so this is, I would say, like an example in the holidays might be I go to a holiday gathering and then I just say like, F it. Right. And I'm going to abandon my whole thing and I'll just, eat whatever I want there. And then I go home and I'm still just off plan for a week plus. Does that sound?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as you were talking about, you were talking about slip and I'm like, yes. So slip makes me think of slippery slope. So for me, like a slip is like what comes after the slippery slope. So the slippery slope could be things like, maybe you're a person who needs like regularly timed meals so that you don't get over hungry, or maybe you don't even have access to your internal hunger and fullness cues yet. So those timed meals really help you to just kind of like stay on track and start to notice those things. So maybe you're getting off track, not just once, but like maybe it's kind of happening over a series of a few days, or there's a pattern to it. So now we're on this slippery slope. We're not sticking to the times that work for us, if that's what's something that works for you. Or maybe weighted measured meals work for you, but because it is the holiday season, or maybe you're like out shopping or you're with friends and family, whatever it might be. And so now you're not weighing and measuring all of your meals, which was something that was working for you. And now you're like, oh, I can eyeball it. And the truth is you probably can eyeball it, a meal here, a meal there, whatever it might be. But like maybe it's becoming this common occurrence. It's happening a few times a day or a few times a week. That's like that slippery slope. So then the slip is like you were saying, like, oh, maybe I said yes to a thing that I thought I would be okay with because I've been getting, quote unquote, getting away with like maybe not having these timed meals or not weighing and measuring everything. So I can get away with something a little, whatever that maybe isn't directly on my food plan. So yes, those slips where it's like we start to slip back into the old thinking or into like deluding ourselves that it's going to be okay or that I can do it. And I say that's like so carefully too, right? Knowing that I myself am a person who I can like talk myself out of believing that my depression is back. Like I'll play this game back and forth. Like, is it? Is it not? Maybe this is just me being tired. No, maybe this is the depression, whatever. Like I can do that back and forth. And like pretty soon I can like delude myself into being like, no, I'm just tired. Just go get a nap, whatever. But really it's back and I need to be telling my people that I need support or whatever it might be. And the same can be true with the food. So that's like how I kind of think about slip. So if you find yourself on a slippery slope, like you're conceding things a little here, a little there, you may be on your way to a slip. So that's just kind of like how I think about it that way. And then, like you said, that recurrence or return to use or relapse or whatever like terminology we want to give it, to keep in mind that recurrence and relapse are like actual medical clinical terms. So if we really want to look at this, like it is a medical diagnosis, that there are things that are actually happening. relapse is when symptoms recur or come back, right? They happen during treatment or after that treatment has stopped. So if you are in, so first and foremost, you have to not have symptoms for a minimum of 3 to 6 months. And if you're actively working on these things and you use the substance or do the behavior or whatever, and symptoms return, that is relapse. Recurrence is after this prolonged period, several months or years of, no symptoms, like basically being in remission, right? Another R word. There's so many R words.
So many R's.
And again, like we tell you this, not because we want you to keep track of all of these things. Like there's not going to be a quiz at the end of the podcast or when you come to group or when you see us next, but we just really want to be mindful of like these words get thrown around a lot. And as a mental health professional, I see this a lot, like, pop psychology or whatever, right? Like we see it on social media platforms, people like saying, oh, do you do this thing? You're probably ADHD. Do you do this thing? That's autism. Do you do this thing? That's so bipolar, right? And people are actually just like throwing these things out there and they're giving words, which are awesome, especially if we didn't have words before, but can be really detrimental because they might not be accurate. So when we're trying to have conversations and really figure out what's going on, it can really mess us up because it can go back to that shame and blame kind of place, So really thinking about language matters. So if you aren't entirely sure what's going on for you, ask somebody who actually knows and understands the differences between relapse, recurrence, slips, lapses, any of those things, and I want to normalize that these things happen. And people
these are part of recovery.
Yeah. People here in group hear me say this all the time. You can be doing everything right and snapback can still happen.
Right. Yeah. And when we interviewed John Kelly, right, he was talking about the actual research into recovery, which says that for most people, they may not get to that 1 year of remission for 7 years because there will be those, it might be slips, it might be reoccurrences throughout that period. Now, most of those times can be abstinent days, but that this is a part of practicing recovery. And so I also loved what you said there about, when we think of even other mental health disorders and symptoms returning, they're all similar, right? If I'm somebody with depression, those symptoms may show up and it may be a certain time of year. It may be, who knows, I can be doing all the things in my life that are supposed to be good for my, depression recovery program. And here it is, whether it's anxiety, if I'm somebody that struggles with anxiety, these symptoms will return over time, even if we are doing things okay. And we have to be compassionate with self. And we just also have to be prepared that is part of this process, that just because, even with cancer, unfortunately, sometimes we get into remission and symptoms start to return. And so we go and we get check-in and, there is just never this kind of cure from these disorders or physical health problems. And so we just always have to have that is still in the back of our mind, that is still a possibility. And how can I be watching out for them and kind of monitoring them on a regular basis?
Yes. And this is that empowerment piece that I love about when you have a good recovery program or you're working with people who know what they're doing in treating these disorders, is that there's going to be empowerment versus fear. We don't want you to fear the relapse, recurrence, slip, lapse. We don't want you to fear those things. We don't want you to be like, oh yeah, I'm looking forward to that day either, rather than planning those things, but to have a healthy respect for the fact that these are things that can happen, but we want to set you up for success so that if and when they happen, right, the whole point is not that we're going to, like you said, cure this, because the systems in the brain have been changed. And we know with systems in the brain, once they're changed, we don't know yet that we can turn them back or change them, to a healthier version, whatever. We're learning things all the time with the brain that, right? We know more things today than we did 10 years ago about the brain. But as of right now, this is where we're at. And so it's more about having the tools and the support to meet these things head on when they do happen. Because I think that there's a lot of fear out there too of like, oh my God, if you do that thing, you're going to relapse. You're going to relapse,
Right.
and then you hear these stories
One
of like,
bite,
oh,
one binge, right? There are tactics everywhere.
And what that does, I think, then sets us up, then we go into that fear mode. So our brains, which are already wired to constantly scan for danger, are now even oversensitive. It's almost like the self-fulfilling prophecy. So I like to use the example of like, let's say you're riding a bike down a street and there's a parked car and you're like, don't hit the car, don't hit the car, don't hit the car as you're riding your bike. You're focusing on that car. You are going to absolutely hit that car because you're like, don't hit that car. All you can do is look at the car. You're going to what we want you to do is we want you to have like that forward sight. Again, you're driving a car, you have a windshield. It's really big, right? So that you can see. We want you to look to where you're going. Look to where you're going. And you can only plan for the things that you can see. And this is where I go back to like you were saying, like, sometimes you can be doing all the right things and it still happens because you can't plan for every single thing. For one. For two, you are never going to override your biology. We hear words like biohacking this and supplement that and whatever else. And while these can be tools, I certainly don't want anybody to think, oh, like all I have to do is pay somebody $1 bajillion. They're going to biohack me out of this and I'm never going to deal with this again. I also don't want to be like all doom and gloom because there are people who live full, wonderful lives.
Well, and the majority of people who continue on the recovery journey do achieve, remission. You just have to keep going. That's the thing we don't talk about enough, right? It's like, yes, exactly. And so I think it might be helpful for us to talk about maybe what are the different steps I could take if I have a slip compared to, we'll start with like slip. So I would usually say the first thing you can do is recognize it as a mistake, right? Not a failure. We don't want to go to that self-critical place because that really shuts us down. We just really want to get curious and say like, what happened there? So this is always going to be a learning opportunity. It's not the end of our progress. And then I'm going to really look at like maybe my environment. Was there something going on there? Was it the people I was with? Was it was I not prepared for the situation? What is my level of emotional stress going into that, where there's some, outside events and maybe that I walked into that event already carrying. And then I'm going to do, we often talk about that slip assessment really in Sweet Sobriety. We discuss, what led to the slip. Let me examine it. Sometimes we call it like permission to be human. And how can I use this to better prepare for the future? And then to like also just recommit to what I know is working for me. So rather than get stuck in the why and the how, I really also want to say like, okay, so what, now what? Marty Lerner, we love you. And so when's my next meal and how can I make that a really good meal? Maybe I want to tap into my why again, just like pull it out and see to recommit and reinforce my commitment. And finally, I really think it's important to just practice that self-compassion that we talk about all the time, because like we said, they're totally normal, part of the recovery process. And just because you've made a momentary deviation from your recovery management plan doesn't mean like everything's going to fall apart.
Yeah. And something that I love, and I'm going to come back to the self-compassion piece because that's huge. Self-compassion is the antidote to shame, and shame is the thing that keeps us stuck in these disorders, right? Whether it be mental health, substance use disorder, whatever it might be. So I think too, as part of like, how do we start to address a slip when it happens? I think we have to be really like radically honest with ourselves of like, let's scale it. How, like from on a scale of 1 to 10, is this like a blip on the radar, like not a big deal, whatever? Is this 10, like we're life flighting people out of here, jaws of life are coming in to cut us out of the car? That's my scale. Because here's the thing. Because in the world of addiction, we work in extremes often, black, white, all, nothing, whatever it might be. And so I think sometimes we can get into that pattern of like, oh, it's not a big deal at all, just do whatever. And then that delusional thing can start happening again. It's like, oh, whatever, it wasn't a big deal. I can do that again, or it will be fine. and I don't have to worry about it at all. And I think we can go to that like, oh my gosh, the house is on fire. My hair is on fire. I'm burning to death. Like chaos place, crisis place. And I think neither one of those things is really actually helpful. We need to get really clear about what was this, because self-compassion, to go back to using that as a tool, has the tender side that says, of course that happened. You're so human. Like this is normal. Like you are not outside of the norm for other individuals who also suffer from this disorder, so like just normalizing, validating, humanizing yourself. But then it has the fierce or the ferocious side that says, now what are you going to do about it? So like Marty Lerner, we love you. So what now what? So it's like, what are those corrective actions that you're going to take? How are you going to show up as mama bear, papa bear for yourself and say, these are the corrective actions I'm going to take? But I think we have to do that within the context of like, what is actually happening here? So taking a step back, like you said, and that oftentimes is way easier to do with another human being because they can be your prosthetic prefrontal cortex. Because I know for me, when I'm in my stuff, everything feels really, really bad, really, really bad. But I know when I come to Clarissa or I go to my husband or my sister, somebody, they like, because they're trying to get information, right? Natural curiosity. You start asking me questions and it actually makes me have to slow down and answer those questions honestly, because I'm going to be more honest with you than I am with myself oftentimes, because I like to beat myself up. Let's be honest, right? Like I'm going to be honest about me and myself. That is my default. I will always be, I shouldn't even say that. I should not speak that into existence. As it is, I am working on not being my biggest bully. It's a difficult process. However, that often does still show up in these moments of panic. Of like, oh, there you go again. You should have known better, whatever it is. So when I can talk to somebody like you, Clarissa, or whomever, you guys start asking me questions and I'm like, oh yeah. So it helps me frame it as to like, is this really a 10? Is this really a 1? Maybe it's actually like a 5. It's serious, but like the world is not going to burn down in the next 5 seconds. So, but okay, it's serious. Okay. Some self-compassion. How did you get here? Of course, this is where you're at. You're going through some stressful stuff, whatever it is. What are you going to do about it? What steps are you going to take to start changing? And even if you don't know, that's okay. Guess. Just take a guess. If you don't know the next step to take, just pick anything, because you're going to know pretty quickly if that's the thing you actually need to be doing, want to be doing, whatever. And you can always change it. This is not set in stone. None of this is set in stone. Like you said, Clarissa, it's an experiment. It's observation. It's like what's working, what's not working.
Yeah. And no, I think I love what you said there. And I think that's so important. And it really speaks to when it is kind of that reoccurrence, when we look at like, what are maybe some of the key differences we might have to do. I think the emotional impact is like greater. So there's going to be more shame. There's going to be more guilt there. The actions need to be a little bit more like a reassessment and support. Like you said, reaching out when we're down, we need others to lift us up. And I think that can help us really reassess and determine, did I have the right or the tools that I needed in that situation? And that can help me really reflect on it and what happened without judgment, because like you said, somebody else is asking us the questions. And then as we're talking about it, that's where it's like, oh yeah, of course, I didn't eat that day. And then I was at the grocery store. Then they were handing out those free samples. And I was also kind of in an argument with somebody. And it just really lets the self-compassion flow in when I was already stuck in judgment on my own. And so that's where I think the level of support required when you are, in a reoccurrence is going to be much more intense. And it could be a recovery community. It could be like your just accountability buddy, maybe it's your 12-step program. So you really want to share your experience with somebody who understands. Maybe it's Vera's like program, her book group, right? And I think you can start to just reassess maybe your recovery management plan. So are your meals satisfying? Are they nourishing enough? Are you setting clear boundaries with the people that you need to? Have you relooked at, some of those triggers? Have they changed? Because they change over time. right? And there can be new triggers. Is there new strategies that you needed? Maybe, like you said, weighing and measuring. When and when I'm in a more acute phase, I am going to bring in some tools that even if I've been, let's say, in remission for a year, I need to treat what's happening at the level it is. And if this is an acute phase, maybe I'm bringing back in weighing and measuring. Maybe I am somebody who really benefited from reporting my food. And it's not that I don't trust myself anymore. I'm just building more safety around my recovery management program. We also really want to get in touch with, was there maybe symptoms there leading up to it that I wasn't aware of? Because if I look, like, being able to look in the rear view can be very helpful to say, oh, you know what? I'd stop doing a few things in my recovery management plan. And I didn't know how valuable those actually were to my remission. And so just allowing yourself to kind of, again, with curiosity and compassion, explore kind of the last few, like maybe month, 2 months, and doing that with support can be really helpful. And then just loving yourself back into remission, right? Maybe more self-care routines and affirmations and stress management, and just, again, being kind to yourself and learning from the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you just said. And so many of our community members in Sweet Sobriety, at one time or another will say, yep, I'm going back to basics because I feel things getting, shaky, or there have been some slips or whatever it might be. So I'm going to go back to basics. And we never do that with shame or fear. It's, I'm going to go back to those very foundational things that I know early days really helped me. And if that helps you get your sea legs back, if that helps you have that confidence in yourself again, it gives you, it puts some days back to back for you. And if that's important to you, you know what I mean? Like, that's important to like your ability to trust yourself or whatever self-talk it is that you have going on, do those things, do them with support. And you're right. If you're in this acute phase, meaning if it's like crisis and it is like sharp. So acute means sharp. Like it's like right there in the moment. It's like very present, very big. I think about if this were a diagnosis like diabetes and all of a sudden it's out of control, or cancer and it's returned, we're going to go back to the thing that originally worked, right? We're going to go back to that medication that originally worked, or that protocol that originally worked. And we're going to give that a try, and we're going to see if that is helpful again. And if it's not, now we know we're going to rule that out and we're going to try something else. But let's go back to tried and true. Again, thinking about this as my husband has given me over the years at least 2, probably, definitely 3. Okay, 3 very good pieces of advice that I hang on to. And one of them is, it's for science. He says that a lot. And I love that my kids get to grow up with that. That's something I had to learn as an adult, but the kids get to grow up with that. And it has this sentiment behind it of like, we're all just figuring it out as we go. Like, there is no blueprint for how to do this. Like, nobody missed the memo. There is no what to expect when you're 25 or 50. Like, there's what to expect when you're expecting, what to expect the first year. Like somebody just decided to stop writing those books. I don't know. Maybe we should write those books. But it wouldn't be helpful. It wouldn't be helpful anyway.
Right. Because it's individual.
Because it is so individual. So even if you had that, whatever. So to remember that it's like, it's all for science. Like, we are just figuring it out as we go. And there is no one right way to do recovery. There's no one right way to live your life. There's no one right way for any of these things that we're experiencing. So if we can come back to like what you were saying, Clarissa, like the curiosity and just going back to basics and observing and just trying different things out with love versus fear and shame. Like, now don't get me wrong. Fear is going to be there, folks. I don't want you to think that I'm like talking about like, let's do this out of love and there's no fear there. I live in fear every day of one thing or another, right? Of one thing or another. There are so many fears. And I think, again, we're just wired that way. I also think that, sometimes we have that extra, like sprinkling of fear because of childhood trauma, whatever it might be. But the point being that we can make that choice. Do we allow the fear to make our decisions? Because now we can see it, right? Once you can see it, you can't unknow it. So do we let that run the show, or do we choose to live in love and make those loving decisions for ourselves? And that it can be so difficult, especially if we weren't shown those things as children. And so it can feel really weird. And I've said this before, I'll say it again on this because I think I said it on Food Shrinks. I'll say it here. Just because something feels bad does not mean it's not good for us. Because things that feel bad, we have to remember the way that our brain is wired is that familiar equals safe to our brain. Well, now let's think about that. If you grew up in a household that was toxic, violent, there was drug abuse, whatever, like those things going on, that's familiar. So that might feel safe to you. So you're repeating those cycles, but it's actually very harmful and toxic. And so then trying to do the new thing, which is have loving limits, speak to yourself with loving kindness, make decisions, like courageous decisions. So feeling the fear and doing it anyway, that's very unfamiliar. So that feels very unsafe. Yet those things are actually often healthier for us than the old stuff. So just to keep that in mind as you're making these changes or trying to have more curiosity around what is it that caused me to make these decisions that led to this slip, lapse, relapse, recurrence, on, and how can I do something different as I move forward, and thinking about it from that framework of like, it's for science. Like nobody really knows how this is going to go, but it's so much cooler and so much more fun to do it with other people. I mean, I'm serious. It is.
I know. I definitely agree. It just makes it easier. You can laugh at yourself sometimes. You can have more compassion for yourself. And I think, again, like what I would just picked up on from what you were saying is when things feel bad, that's not a bad thing always, right? And that there's also, fear. Everybody associates fear with bad, but there is healthy fear that we still need to have with addiction. And so this is what comes to like, how can I know when I need to have a healthy fear around some of these symptoms, and what do these symptoms look like? Now, they're going to be different for everyone, but I think some common ones that we would probably say show up for the most in our clients would be, the intense cravings. So if you're noticing that there's more cravings, maybe you start having thoughts like moderation is possible with some of the foods that I'm pretty sure if I check in with my people, they will say, remember about all the times you tried that and that didn't work? So that romanticizing. If you're noticing, I really haven't reached out to my recovery people in a long time. And so I'm starting to maybe isolate a bit. That might be a symptom that you might notice. Maybe you're starting to do things that are like unfamiliar in your new recovery life, but they are familiar with their old life that you were in. So maybe it's people that you used to hang out with. Maybe if you're noticing that, I'm having more stress and maybe some of my behaviors are changing, that can be a symptom as well to be watching out for. And like even just like noticing like a loss of interest in some of the positive activities and hobbies that you've been engaging in, may be like, okay, I just really want to check in and what's going on here with my people. Is there any other symptoms that like you can really think about that might be prominent in food use?
That's really good. Those are really good. And I think the thing is that so many of them are so sneaky, in that because it's too exhausting. There's too much energy going out if we constantly have to
assess.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly. And so because of that, our brain does the thing where it like relies on habits. It relies on patterns. And this is where it is so important that we do create habitual patterns that do work for us, because our brain will always want to default to that because it's less energy. So every once in a while, maybe once a day, whatever, you may want to do check-ins. So like 12-step programs, have people do this, as part of like taking in a daily inventory. And certainly it doesn't have to be like a daily inventory, but maybe you start your day with some sort of like journaling or gratitude practice or something. And maybe that's a time that you might check in and go like, how did yesterday go? Did it go the way that I had hoped that it would go? Were there any like things that got in there that maybe I'm curious about? Like, how did that happen? Or I'm nervous about? Because like you said, like that healthy fear, like I like to think of it as respect. Like, let's respect the fact that this stuff can kill us eventually, right? Like whatever it is that's going on, it can and will kill us eventually or whatever, if we don't take care of it. Right. And so, I like to do this at the end of the night, especially again, like with my husband, I might be like, oh, how did the day go? Oh, I messed up there. I did apologize, or maybe I didn't and I need to there, whatever it might be. And I guess I've never really thought of it as a daily inventory, more of just like, how did the day go and how do I want tomorrow to go versus how today went? Or maybe it was awesome and I want to repeat that. How did I do that? So I think, that is a way for it to not be as sneaky, like, and still put energy into it, have intention behind it, have active participation in recovery, without it constantly feeling like, oh my God, how do I raise children, have a job, have a partner?
How do I know when it's happening?
Yes. And like have all of this going out, like people are burning
and
out.
living life.
Yes. Because that's actually recovery, is living your life, being in the moment, riding the bike, walking in the woods, doing your paint by numbers, whatever it is that you're doing, like being present in that's recovery. And we kind of have to be aware.
Yeah, I think that's also another reason why it is so helpful to have your people, because your people will notice when you're starting to maybe drop off, or like, even if you're like, I know if something's going on with Molly right away, just from like the way that she responds. And I'm sure like if there's not a million emojis in my text message or lots of like exclamation marks, she's probably like, uh-oh, what's happening? It's either I'm really busy or there's things going on that I need to talk about. And so again, like having those people, it doesn't even have to be like necessarily someone in recovery. It can just be your bestie who knows you well enough to say, oh, you know what, I'm just going to check in. I've noticed some things. You haven't been the same as usual. Is everything okay? Because even just having somebody ask us, I'm a verbal processor. So when somebody asks me, I have to pause and I have to think, and then I'm able to reflect back. And I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. I didn't even notice that I've just been so busy or working so much, or, there is things I've been neglecting. Oh, I hurt my foot, so I haven't been able to exercise. Oh, that's probably affecting my mood. These kind of things, I may not even pick up on in the moment because life is so busy, like you said, and we want to be living life. That's why we get into recovery.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of some of those subtle signs, like you said, verbal processor, I am too. So I know for me, now I don't always recognize it in me because it's my default mode. But like when I go silent or I stop communicating as often, that's probably a pretty good, clear indication to anybody that like, oh, shit's going down. Like something's happening with Molly and she's whatever it is, because like, that's my default, is like, I will go into myself and I will reemerge when it's like worked out, because I learned when I was little that I couldn't trust anybody. Now that's not true. That's just an old belief system. But like when it's really tough, my default system still kicks in. That's what I'm saying. Like it's still a work in progress, folks. Like I've been in therapy for 20 something years. I'm working on it. I'm aware of it and I'm trying to be more communicative about it. But that's like, so just thinking about some of those like more subtle things for yourself too, that might let people know things aren't going well. And then can you communicate them with somebody? Like you said, Clarissa, it doesn't even have to be somebody in recovery. It can be your bestie. It can be your spouse. It can be a sibling that you're close to. Maybe none of those things are true, but maybe you're really close to the librarian because you go to the public library often or whatever. But like sometimes just having these conversations and letting other people love us, letting other people love us enough to say, hey, are you okay? Because sometimes just even having that question, Clarissa, I know the other day you messaged, you're like, hey, just checking in because stuff's pretty like crazy right now in my life. And even sometimes just something like that, it's like, oh, I have to remember to breathe. I have to remember to communicate. I have to remember to do these things because I go into that survival place, which is so human of all of us. And it's the old default. It's familiar, which equals safe, but it is not necessarily the healthiest thing for me, for you, for anybody. So yeah, I mean, I think in the end, I just really want people to listen to this episode and really kind of think about what it is for them that looks like a slip. How would they know? How can they communicate that? How would they get out of it? And so hopefully come away from this episode with just feeling more human, feeling more validated, and hopefully more loving toward themselves. Maybe they can see themselves through like a loving lens, a little more clear than prior to listening. I don't know. I mean, what are your best hopes for the takeaways today?
Yeah, well, I came up with some mantras for recovery because I am a mantra maniac and I love it. So, everyone always says progress over perfection, but I think perseverance over perfection. So it's those small, consistent changes that lead to our long-term success, consistency over intensity. Focus on like building these habits in your recovery life that you can maintain for a lifetime. Compassion over criticism, right? Treat yourself with kindness, even when we stumble, even when we struggle. Resilience over regret. Each challenge is just like an opportunity to grow stronger in recovery. Learning over guilt. And so mistakes are lessons. They're not failures. Connection over isolation. Lean on your support people. And empowerment over temptation. So every mindful choice you make will strengthen your recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a reminder, like, you can be in recovery and not be abstinent. You can be abstinent and not be in recovery. And that is
that an episode that we need to
have to be an episode. It might have to be an episode because people might be like, oh, what is that? And what does even that mean? So absolutely. But I do want to leave folks with that in the end, speaking of mantras, and things that we can really like hang on to when we're feeling lost. I love all those things that you had to say because I believe them too, that progress over perfection, or even like you said, like perseverance. But yeah, lean into a saying that works for you. If that's something that works for you, a mantra, something that you can give you think of it as like a lighthouse or a guiding light. When you're feeling lost, how do you get yourself back on track? And maybe one of those things that you just said, Clarissa, can be that for somebody. And then that can just help us all to be a little more compassionate with ourselves on this healing journey.
Well, I'm excited for 2025. I know you're excited, but you might not be just speaking for you now. But I'm always excited. Let's just be honest.
I'm always excited because I'm like, dang, let's make this past year over because it never fails. It always ends in a really like dramatic way in my life. So I'm always looking forward to the new year. Like, oh, there's hope. There's all of these things. We're looking forward to the conference in September 2025 in Mexico City. Like, we've got lots of good things coming down the pipe for sweet sobriety and just for ourselves individually, for food addiction in general and it being recognized. So I too can agree that I'm excited.
And let us know what you want us to talk about on Clinician's Corner. So what's the email address that they need to...
Yeah, so they can email us at foodjunkiespodcast@gmail.com.
Awesome. And we look forward to hearing from you, and we'll see you in a month.
Woo-hoo, bye.
Thanks for joining us this week on Food Junkies Recovery from Food Addiction. Make sure to join our Facebook group, Sugar Free for Life Support Group. I'm Sweet Enough. Molly and Clarissa are food addiction professionals who offer one-to-one counseling and group coaching through sweet sobriety. Please subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in today's episode, we'd appreciate you leaving us a review on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps grow our show and allows us to reach others who need to hear this message of recovery. Don't forget to pick up a copy of Dr. Tarman's book, Food Junkies. And as Vera always says, the power is ours.